Have the green light.
Oh, excellent. Good morning, everybody. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the virtual, but really not so virtual audience. Welcome to this First United Nations Economic Commission for Africa online global debate on Africa's COVID-19 lockdown exit strategies. Wherever you are joining us from this morning, whether from Africa or any other place, you have one way witnessed fundamental changes that most individuals, communities, countries, and indeed the planet since the beginning of the year, starting with China. There is still a whole we do not know about COVID-19, but almost unanimously, public health experts agree that in the absence of vaccine, the best weapon we have is to slow the spread of the virus transmission. Hence, social distancing, and in some cases, lockdown. In Africa, no less than 42 countries have implemented partial or full lockdown, including curfews in some instances. And we have also, of course, witnessed how much suffering these situations have caused on the most socioeconomically vulnerable members of our communities. We are going to discuss this morning and answer all the questions we would have around this very topic. For now, to get us started, I would like to first invite Vera Songwe, who is the Undersecretary for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and Executive Secretary of, Undersecretary of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, who will be delivering us her opening for her welcome remarks. Before we go that, just one minute, please. Before we go into that, I just would like to say our discussion would be in two parts today. The first one would be when we have introductory remarks from Vera Songwe, then we will have the keynote address from Her Excellency Arantxa González Laya, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation from Spain. And in the second in the second part of our gathering this morning, we'll try to answer a number of questions with a very diverse and excellently able panel we will have. We'll get to the panel in the second part as announced earlier, and I will introduce the panel at that time. But for now, I have the pleasure to invite Vera Songwe to take the floor for her welcome remarks.
Thank you, Amadou Masamba. You deserve and need no introduction. But thank you so much for moderating this with us. I want to start by saying that this is, first of all, a collaborative effort between the Economic Commission for Africa, a group of media houses across the continent, and even maybe can those who are not speaking go on mute, because I can hear myself coming back. And so I was saying this is a collaborative effort with ourselves, a group of media houses, civil society organizations, and of course governments. So that's the first thing I just want to say. I want to thank everybody who is on the line and has decided to spend a little bit of their time with us this morning. This is a very important topic, and we thought we should have it. But again, I think as we will all agree, probably the most busy people on this conversation today who are struggling with the issues are our distinguished ministers, starting first of all, of course, with our own minister from Rwanda, Dr. Uziel. I think, thank you for joining us, and you'll be telling us what's happening on the continent. But we are coming, the continent is sort of following, what happened in other parts of the world, of course, starting, as Amadou said, in China. And I think we have the ambassador and some representatives from China with us online, and at some point we'll call them. But I think that the world really woke up to this when it hits Europe and for, Italy first, and then Spain. And what better and more, I think, fitting purpose than to have our dear own, our very own, a very good friend of ours, Minister, of course, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain, a true friend of the continent and somebody who understands development, who was just in Ethiopia, I think, at the end of February with us, and is now the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain, to tell us a little bit about the Spanish experience. We've all watched it on TV, but I think hearing it from Her Excellency, the Honorable Minister, especially coming from us, coming from the development world, and then now going to the policy world where, your shoulders, you're carrying the problem and the solutions, and are doing a fantastic job to tell us a little bit about it. I also want to welcome Kennedy. Again, as I was saying just before we started, Kennedy Odede, the ministers are working at that very high level, the journalists are reporting on these things, but Kennedy is in Kibera. He's in the middle of that question about how do I eat versus how do I sort of, make sure that COVID doesn't hit me. And this really is the challenge. The study that we're about to launch says that we're losing 2.5% of our GDP on lockdowns. But can you quantify a life? If we don't lock down and you lose a life, what percentage of our GDP is that? And I think that is a little bit the intangible question sometimes that we must remember to answer when we talk about, do we need to lock down or do we need to open up? Because lives are, as we know, intangibles, but every life is probably 20% of GDP. And this is the tension that governments are facing. Of course, we have somebody who is in the middle of a military lockdown or has seen the military lockdown happen in all its forms. And that is Professor Mayaki. I'm going to ask him to turn on his camera. Professor Mayaki is in South Africa, so he's sort of witnessed, I think, the sort of swift, decisive, and determined decisions from the government of South Africa to immediately impose a lockdown on the country. And at some point I was saying that, this was sort of almost akin to, we saw those pictures of, military vehicles getting into the streets of South Africa that evening and thinking, wow, this is serious business. But I think since then, we've also seen that South Africa is beginning to contain the virus. I think that they're now at 7,000. The number may have gone much higher. There is some talk about that curve now, not maybe bending, but at least flattening or slowing down. So there is evidence that maybe this is working. And Professor Mayaki will be telling us a little bit about what he thinks about lockdowns. He's been quite vocal about it. So it's good to have, I think, this wide range of people here. What we have also seen is that when we have lockdowns, people go hungry. We've launched a survey, which is in our study, that says that people have reduced meals by 50%. So essentially, does that make them also a little bit more, at risk to get the disease, because then their immune systems are weaker and they are not as strong? And we're getting some very interesting results around that. But that is why I think that government leaders maybe then need to do targeted, food supplies. Of course, Africa is an informal sector, which is quite huge. So how do we get to those people? I think those are all the tensions that governments are facing and are struggling with as they look at this lockdowns. Our report essentially doesn't take sides. I think we give a sense of, the sort of 7 strategies of shelter in place, what can happen, what are some good examples that we've learned from Spain, from South Korea, from and Sweden doing something different, and the UK and the United States. But maybe it's just to put all of this into context, but leaving you with the question of, yes, we can quantify GDP when we say we lock down, but how do we quantify lives? And really, this is the question that we must ask as we sort of struggle with, is a lockdown good? Is a lockdown not good? Should we wear masks? Is mask an important thing to do to prevent this? On that note, I want to welcome all our speakers, and again to open the floor first, starting with the minister. I think, do I go back to you, Amadou, or do I go directly to the minister? So you're on mute.
Okay, I'm happy to introduce her. We're all adjusting to these technologies. It doesn't get easier. Well, thank you very much, Her Excellency, for your opening remarks. And indeed, thank you also for the very rich document which was presented and prepared at the Economic Commission for Africa. I would like now to turn to Her Excellency Arantxa Gonzalez Laya. She's from one of the hardest hit countries by COVID-19, the Kingdom of Spain. She's also one of the most trusted friends of Africa, with a good knowledge of the continent. And of course, there's a wealth of experience we can learn from Spain, unfortunately, because it has been very hard hit, but also because Spain is one of our closest neighbors from the European nations. So, Her Excellency, I have the pleasure to invite you to the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. Let me start by saying that in this pandemic, the first lesson that we have drawn is to be extremely humble. Humble about the knowledge we have of COVID, its origins, its development, the way it moves, the way it behaves. Humbled about the response that we have been able to give individually as a country, but also collectively as a global community, and humbled about the consequences that we now have to face, especially on the economic front. So my starting point will be one of humbleness. I'll try to share some of the things, some of the lessons we have learned, but also I'll be very interested to learn from the lessons that other people draw, because what we need to do is learn so that this does not happen to us again. This pandemic is hitting us all. Nobody is responsible, everybody is affected. And it's important to understand that this is not anyone's fault. It's a systemic issue we need to deal with as a global community. Second, it's important to realize that nobody will be safe until everybody is safe. And this requires big doses of global cooperation. If we are to protect our own citizens' lives, we need to care about other citizens' lives too. Number three, there is a very big relationship between health and the economy. And this requires synchronizing our efforts as we fight against the pandemic, but also as we reconstruct our economies. We are going to have to synchronize our efforts so that we maximize the impact of our global cooperation. And I'm saying this because I want to stress over and over again that there is no such thing as a good national solution. We need to make sure we get a good global collaboration, cooperation, in order to ensure we protect citizens' lives. We in Spain started from the end of December, beginning of January, like everybody else, watching what was happening, following the recommendations and the advice we were getting from the international health authorities, from the European health authorities, from our own scientists. It culminated at the beginning of March with the declaration of a state of alarm, the purpose of which was to control the pandemic, prevent the virus from spreading so fast that it would collapse our healthcare system. So stage one of the response was very much health focused. What have we learned on this health side is two things. One, the importance of doing to our healthcare systems what we've been doing to our financial sector is stress tests. Develop a methodology and the habit of testing our healthcare systems against extreme shocks like a pandemic. And this is something that we are pushing in the European Union, but something that we are also pushing within the multilateral setting in the WHO, because we think that we had for a long time neglected investments that are necessary and preparedness that is necessary on the healthcare system. And this may have detracted in many countries the ability to respond. Number two, on this healthcare front also, we've also learned the importance to develop protocols of preparedness that again would help us deal with extreme circumstances. Take, for example, equipment, medical or sanitary equipment, whether it's respirators, whether it's masks, protective equipment, testing kits. We all had a bit of that in our countries. In Spain, we even had production of some of these products. But what we have learned is the importance of investing in probably stocking, not just at the national level, but probably for us in Spain at the European level, in Africa probably at the African level, in order to have a better ability to respond in a flexible way to the pandemic. As we fought on the sanitary front, we also took very early on a set of economic measures to protect productive capacity, to preserve employment, and to address the needs of the poorest in our society. And we did this because our vision was to fight this crisis differently from the 2008 crisis, where we lost, first, where we had huge social suffering, where we lost a lot of economic muscle. And we thought that with a systemic crisis like this one, our objective needed to be preserve and protect productive capacity and employment in order to exit the crisis as soon as the pandemic would be under control. Effectively, this means a lot of public spending to support the economy. To give you a sense, we now have 5.5 workers that are basically supported by the state with public financing. This is going to translate into public debt, but what we also have understood is that today it matters less that we spend a lot and that we incur in public debt. Today what counts is to keep our economies capable of rebounding as soon as we control COVID. The third part of the response has been de-escalating the very harsh measures we took in order to prevent social contact. For us, it meant confining 47 million Spaniards into their homes. What we are doing now is gradually removing this, physical limitation measures that we took. We are doing this with two considerations in mind. One, it has to be gradual. We started at the beginning of this week. We will end on the 30th of June. We will move into phases. Moving from phase 1 to phase 2 and then to phase 3 means gradually more degree of mobility for people. But we are also doing this in a manner that allows every region in the country to move at their own pace. And the pace is determined by the capacity each region has to respond to a spike in cases. So what we are saying is it's gradual, it's in accordance with how every region can move, but the basic consideration is a healthcare system in the region that can absorb new cases if they appear. So we all start at the same time, beginning of May, we all end at the same time, 30th of June, but we travel these 2 months in a different way. Some of our regions are already COVID-free. We've got a number of islands. They have no COVID cases, but we've got other regions where there is a big prevalence, still a high prevalence of COVID. So we've got to do this in a differentiated. Number 4, we are now preparing recovery plans. Obviously, recovery plans are extremely important, again, to get the economy to rebound. And within these recovery plans, obviously, there is a bigger space for one that is very dependent on mobility and represents a big part of our GDP, which is tourism. Spain is within one of the world's most visited countries. Tourism represents a big part of our economy, and what we are now having to do is arbitrate a set of measures that will help tourism with safety, open gradually to tourists, but making sure this doesn't put at risk the health of either visitors or Spaniards. 5th and final is we are also investing collectively as part of a global community in the development on production at scale and distribution of vaccines, treatment, and diagnostics. We were part of the co-hosts of the pledging conference that the European Union and many friends around the world held last Monday. Africa was very well represented. The president of the African Union, president of South Africa, Ramaphosa, was there. It is very important because ultimately we will get back to a new normal when we have a vaccine and a treatment. So we need to make sure that not only do we invest nationally, but we do this collectively to ensure, at least this is the view of the Spanish government, that we ensure every citizen anywhere in the world, whether the country is rich or poor, can get access to the vaccine and the treatment as soon as it is discovered. So we have to also push for this idea of cooperation and multilateralism. I will end by saying what worries us most now is keeping this spirit of cooperation to ensure we do not see further fracturing in our societies with the growth of inequalities, further fracturing of the global community with the division of the world in blocks, further fracturing of our economies with big companies being able, maybe because they've got a bit more muscle, to survive better than the micro, smaller or medium companies that have less of a capacity to sustain for a long time a period of limited economic activity. And to avoid this further fracturing, a big, very important ingredient will be that we advance multilateral cooperation, that we advance solidarity and cooperation as the basis for ensuring we do not exit this crisis with further fracturing our societies, our economies, and the global community. And of course, this is the reason why Spain, as it is responding to the situation at home, is also very committed. The president of the government, our prime minister, is extremely committed to making sure that we do this in the spirit of cooperation with other regions. Obviously, Africa is not only our next door neighbor, but also a continent with which we have good relations and we have links that for us are important to express today in greater collaboration. So thanks again for this opportunity, and obviously very happy to keep this conversation going.
Thank you very much, Her Excellency, for your really very rich remarks you just shared. You stressed some key aspects here. You spoke about humility, spoke about the fact that no one will be safe until everyone is safe, which is absolutely key, which actually somehow comes back to our Ubuntu concept in Africa. You also really showed clearly the link between also the economy and this disease. And you also, expanded a little bit on the different steps your country is taking now that it's coming out from the lockdown phase, going into the exit strategy, starting with the different phases. I think that's absolutely important and critical. But you also mentioned additional, key aspects here. And when you're talking about, avoiding this fracturing, as you called it, which could be a result of this virus spreading into our communities and into our countries. You spoke about, the local level, of course, fracturing, but also at the planetary level. I'm thinking about multilateralism because that's really what it is clearly here. So, I think the way we will proceed now, I have one or two questions to you, and then I will turn it to Vera somewhere at the UNECA to see if she has some questions she would want to pose to you before we come back and I introduce the panel and go into the discussion. So obviously, when you look at the continent, the difference we had with Europe is that we have a lag here. We're being hit by the disease. We're being hit by the economic, pressures first before the disease coming in very strongly. So unlike Europe, there's a lag here from that perspective. Now, when you look at the continent, because you know the continent so very well, because you worked on trade issues on the continent when you were at the UN, what would you think? And I take note of the humility aspects you mentioned earlier, very important. When you look at the continent, knowing what you have, what you learned from Spain and Europe, and looking at the situation on the continent, what would be your advice, your words of wisdom to the leaders on the continent currently?
So, of course, a big casualty of the sanitary crisis is the economy, and a big casualty of the economy is jobs, and this is people. And in the case of and this is what we are seeing in Spain. This is what we are seeing in Europe. Every forecast that any international organization puts out looks even worse than the one before. In the case of Africa, this problem is compounded because you've got a combination of very low oil prices that hit countries that are dependent on oil. You've got a reduction in remittances as a result of the slowdown of the economies of the countries where the diaspora is, a decrease in international trade, a reduction of international investment, a reduction in the capacity to generate taxes. So it is, I have full understanding for the difficulties on the economic front. In my view, what we have to do, whether it's in the north or in the south, is work along two priorities. Priority number one is the most immediate. And in my view, on the most immediate, we've got to spend to keep capacity and people's jobs alive. And obviously, this will mean incurring higher debt, and we will have to accept probably also a new normal on that front than what we were used to in the past. Now, for African economies, this means also having better access to instruments of liquidity that will help the countries face the most immediate economic challenge. And this is why Spain is supporting very strongly that we find this liquidity in the form of creating more fiscal space in the countries by reducing servicing debt, whether it's public debt, but also privately held debt. And I think there we've got to make it clear that right now, maybe being a bit more patient on that front will allow the economies to rebound faster down the line, and will allow, therefore, a recovery that will guarantee the debts held by commercial operators better in the future. We also have to look at probably mobilizing better what international financial institutions can provide. In my view, we are not fully exploiting the tools of the international financial institutions, whether it's in the form of SDRs in the International Monetary Fund, whether it's in the form of financing that the World Bank can offer. So in my view, this is the time to use all available weaponry that we have deployed to keep economies alive. Because the more we do now, the more it will pay off down the line. And the less we do now, the more prolonged will be the problem down the line. That's what we have to keep in mind. Second, I think we also have to look at the reform of our economies for the future. And in this respect, digitalization and technology is going to be a very important factor. We are seeing this also in our own management of the crisis now, whether it's with online learning. We've closed the schools, but we should not stop teaching people, whether it's technology on tracing people that may be asymptomatic but carry the virus, whether it's on online payments, whether it's on online purchasing. So we've discovered the big impact that technology has, and maybe this is an opportunity for the future to include more technology in our own economies.
Thank you very much for insisting and really mentioning, privacy, if I could say that, of human lives to the economy. Of course, they interrelated, but we, as said by one of our head of states in Africa, we know how to restart economies. We don't know how to bring back people to life once they've passed. So that is really a key point. Now, I just want to ask a second question, which is related to the multilateralism. You mentioned the pledging conference and organized by the European Union, and Africa was represented, which is a great thing. A big country represented. I don't need to name it. Everybody would know the country that was represented at this pledging conference. But to you, as a neighbor, as a member of the European Union and as a friend of Africa, is this, and I'm receiving a lot of questions around this. And you assure the African continent that if there is a vaccine, it would not be the last one to benefit from it. And this is, I can't tell how many questions I've been receiving on this. And I would be remiss really if I don't ask it.
First, for us, we're at the time where it's not just about saving yourself. You don't save yourself if the others are not safe. So it makes no sense to try and go purely nationally. And this is why what we are saying and what we are doing is investing in collective responses. So we were one of the first ones to join a call by the World Health Organization and its Director General, Dr. Tedros, together with the Bill and Melinda Gates, to sign a commitment that we will ensure that the development of new vaccines and treatments and diagnostics will be done in an open and cooperative manner, that it will not just be for the company that discovers the vaccine, and it will not be just for the country where that company sits, that we understand what we have to do now is ensure this vaccine and the treatment is deployed as fast as we can to every corner of the world. So we signed a pledge, many other governments, and by the way, private sector and foundations, civil society committed to this open cooperative approach. We think it's very important to keep this private partnership spirit, because this is what will also help. But it's not enough to pledge that you're going to do it cooperatively. You also have to invest financially in making sure the vaccine and the treatment and the diagnostics is invented, scaled, and again, distributed. So we are, through our own scientists and laboratories, working already in the development of a potential vaccine. We are already at the phase of testing it on clinical trials, and we do hope that our scientists are the best and then can get to the vaccine. But if it's not them, for us it doesn't matter. What matters is that we get to deploy these means as soon as we can. From where we sit, we will be capitalizing 2 international partnerships that are essential to this endeavor. So our financing, and we've pledged to put an important contribution, will go to CEPI, which is a partnership that will accelerate and scale the manufacturing of the vaccine. It's already accelerating a number of experiments around the world. We want to capitalize this private partnership institution, because what we think we can do through that is fast track the development. But we are also capitalizing Gavi, another international public-private partnership platform that will help us with the distribution. So it's not enough to invent. You first have to invent. You then have to produce at the scale, and then you need to make sure you can distribute it to every corner of this planet. For us, what's important is, again, capitalizing these 2 institutions that, from where we sit, will be important in ensuring the vaccine and the treatment gets to everybody. And we are ready to do this in a spirit of solidarity. These are not easy times for our country, but we understand that it's part of our collective insurance policy.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your really clear answers to this prime concern. And please, as long as you can, turn it to Vera Songwe at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa to see if there is some questions or a reaction you would like to share after hearing you.
No, thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for sharing, I think, the experiences of Spain with us. I take 3 things away, probably also from a background. One is the equivalence of the financial stress testing with the health stress testing. I would even go further to say, given that our kids are out of school, education stress testing. And I think that leads to a little bit what you've said about the internet, because in the developed world, a lot of the kids are still going to school at home and online. And here on the continent with the lockdown, we are also seeing a huge and high cost for education, and kids would have lost 1 year. I think the second thing that you said, which is quite important, and there is a lot of conversation now on the continent about have we forgotten about the CFTA or are we still doing it, is this collaboration, the continent coming together to say, how do we procure, how do we ensure that, yes, we don't stockpile maybe in just one country the PPEs, but that collectively on the continent we have access to the right things. And finally, 5.5 million people that you have on sort of ensured that, they get some kind of support as the crisis happens. We're seeing these numbers across the world. On the continent, because of our informality, I think those numbers are much higher. And I think essentially what you've said is let's spend now, because if we don't spend now, the hole will be deeper and much more difficult to come out of. We're talking about, is it a V-shaped or is it a U-shaped? We all want it to be a V-shaped. The only way we can get a V-shape is that we spend now. And hence, I fully agree with you. We do need the debt standstill. We need the SDRs. And anything that the debt standstill essentially is saying to government, if you don't do your debt service, you can use that money immediately to ensure that people get food. We started this by saying, You know, a lot of the Africans are going now on less food than they were already going on. And we have some studies at the ECA that actually show that already 40% of Africa's poor live on less than the required $1.25 a day, which means that these people are now at even 60 cents. So they're much deeper into poverty. The drop down into poverty is much deeper. So we hope that we can find and work with you to see ways of working together to get the debt standstill 2 years, one, because as you said yourself, all the predictions that we make today are sort of obsolete tomorrow because the crisis is just getting deeper and even worse. How do we protect our SMEs? This is something that was your passion a few weeks ago before you had the whole world to worry about now. And that's another big issue, is how do we protect SMEs? How do we protect the women also as we go forward? But I think this will be things that hopefully, just as you have done the vaccine and Europe has come together with Africa to make that call, maybe in the very, very near future, we can have a conversation around Africa and the G20 and us saying, where is Africa now as we get into the end of the month of May? Let's take stock. Our numbers are beginning to rise. We're at 50,000 today, with about 1,500 that had died. So, you know, it started very slowly, but it's hitting us. And I think I would really love to be able to see Europe come around Africa in a month's time just to take stock of where we are. But on that note, thank you so, so much for joining us, for giving us those wise words. It's first about people, protecting people and protecting lives, but it is also about ensuring that there is an economy to recover to, and how we do it. And I think we take that lesson. And now we're going to go to the debate, and please stay with us if you can. Professor Mayaki has some very strong views. I'm very curious to hear his views as well as Minister Uziel. So I'll hand it back over to you, Madhu, and I saw Harun joined us. Sorry, Harun, I didn't welcome you in the beginning. I didn't see you on the screen. And I think Mustafa Meluk as well. So welcome. You will be telling us, I'm talking about poverty. You are our continental poverty expert. So you can tell us what's happening with the lockdowns and the poverty incidents on the continent. Thank you again, Harun, for joining us. Over to you, Maktar.
If I may, before we move into this the next phase, I am unfortunately have to go to a cabinet meeting now. My colleague, Mr. Robredo, will sit here and will make sure that he can input or take any good ideas that come from the discussion. And thanks again. Apologies, I cannot join you longer, but thank you very much for this opportunity.
We are the ones thanking you. Thank you. Be safe.
Thank you very much, and stay safe. Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard it. So I guess now we're going to be going to a second part of our gathering this morning. We've heard what's happened in Spain, and obviously we have also stressed that it's somehow different with what's happening on the continent. But reality is, on the continent too, we have had at least 42 countries which went on to full or partial lockdowns, and sometimes, accompanied with curfews. And now we are starting to discuss about exit strategy. So I guess we have a number of questions. And we have a very eminent panel, which I will be introducing in a minute. And, just to frame this, I would like to throw out there a certain number of questions for the panel to consider. And one of them is, obviously, as we are going to start exiting from these lockdowns, partial or full, where do we go from here? And second is exactly, what do we go to? And then how and when do we get there? Very important is, who do we go there with as a continent? What are the partners? Who are the partners in this new journey we're going to be taking? And what would be expected from those partners? And when I say partners, I'm not thinking from governments. I'm not only talking about, foreign governments. I'm talking within our own ecosystem, within the countries, within the continent, private sector, academia, civil society. Who are those partners and what is expected from them? We are blessed this morning to have a very distinguished panel, as I mentioned earlier. We are joined by His Excellency, Mr. Uziel Ndagijimana, who is the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning from the Republic of Rwanda. We have also the pleasure to welcome our very own good friend and really eminent Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Mayaki, who is the CEO of the African Union Development Agency. We also have with us from South Africa, Professor Harun Barat, who is a professor of economics and director of the Development Policy Research at the University of Cape Town. We have our good friend from Morocco, Mr. Mustafa Melouk, who is the CEO of Casablanca Media Partners and who is the founder of Africa 2025 think tank. And finally, we have Mr. Kennedy Odede, who is the CEO and co-founder of Shining Hope for Communities. We heard earlier from Vera about the excellent work he's been doing in Kibera. I would like to start our discussion by going to His Excellency, Mr. Uziel Ndagijimana. As we all know, Rwanda, your country, His Excellency, went into the lockdown. We're going into a phase of exiting this lockdown. What have you learned, and what are the different steps which are put in place now to get Rwandans where they need to get to in a safe environment, and keeping in also, all minimizing the disruption and the disparities we have heard earlier in the presentation from Her Excellency Arantxa Gonzalez. His Excellency Uziel Ndagijimana, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Vera, for organizing this discussion. Thank you, our moderator. Thank you all for joining this meeting. Before answering to your questions, let me start by short background. In Rwanda, we got our first imported case of coronavirus on the 14th of March. After that date, we see more cases brought by different airlines landing in Sudan. But before that, we had already started preventive measures by screening all passengers, by conducting awareness campaigns among our population. And on 21st of March, we imposed a total lockdown, with the exception of agricultural activities, because we noticed that our rural area was safe, and we were in the middle of agricultural season, and we allowed agricultural activity to continue, and also the whole agricultural value chain, including agro-processing under food health measures. We prohibited all movement from the Kigali city when cases of coronavirus found from the rest of the country. And also, we suspended all economic activities except essential services such as financial services, health services, but also the supermarkets that the people can buy food, and open markets where many people sell food, agricultural produce, but observing this social distancing and taking all other health measures. So the lockdown went on until this week on Monday, 4th of May, where now we, after analysis of the situation, the trend of the pandemic, which really shows that we have contained the pandemic. We conduct a test outside Kigali to see whether there were cases countryside with no case found. We tested, we took sample of people who continue to work in those essential services before they were exposed. There was a 0 case. Then the cabinet decided to partially relax the lockdown. And since Monday this week, most of the activities have resumed, but everyone has to observe strict health measures, including mandatory facial masks, social distancing in public places, in the office space. We allow people to go back to office, but only we allow only essential staff that must be in office. The maximum is 50%. All the rest can work from home as we were used to do during the lockdown. In the public transport is allowed, but the maximum number of passengers in a bus is 50%. We need to have to observe some distance between passengers, and all passengers must wear a mask and also use the hand sanitizers before entering the bus and before exiting the bus. And people waiting for buses at the bus station also have to observe at least 1 meter distance. So we have put up a system to make sure that these measures are enforced. So now we also have what has been really important for us during all this period until today is really to have a health system that is well organized. We have increased our testing capacity. Every day we test over 1,000 people. We have established a command center which is in charge of all operations related to COVID-19, including tracing all contacts related to COVID-19. We have established different isolation centers outside hospitals to avoid any contamination to patients. And we every day we receive a report from the command center on the situation. At national level, we have the task force, which is at ministerial level, chaired by the Prime Minister, which also coordinates all activities related to COVID-19 for health. But at the same time, we have also already established an economic task force chaired by the Minister of Finance, including the Central Bank, the Minister of Trade Industry, the Minister of Agriculture, Rwanda Development Board, and the other institutions, the Rwanda Regional Authority, and the Private Sector Federation to monitor the effect of COVID-19 on the economy, so that we can unlock on daily basis any disruption in the distribution of goods, in the businesses. So this has been very helpful to make sure that we minimize as much as we can.
I think we have lost His Excellency from Rwanda. Are you still there? I think we have your sound. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I don't know what you have had. I can go back to this.
No. It's fine. It was just the past 5 seconds that I didn't follow you. And if you would just wind down on that, then we'll come back to you. Thank you.
No, that's why it's good. Before I finish, what's important really is to have an organized health system, is to have institutional arrangement that ensure daily monitoring of the situation, both on the health side but also on the economic side, and also to put up mechanisms to ensure that the population respects the health measures, the protective measures, including masks, hand washing, and all other preventive measures. But also, at the same time, we have worked on a recovery plan, which is now starting to be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. As you know, we are all used to seeing best practices from Rwanda. So I can assure you, the continent have its eyes open as you come into this new phase and hoping to share, to benefit from the best practices which will be coming from your country. We'll come back to you. And for now, I would like to turn to His Excellency, Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Mayaki. Good morning. And before I give him the floor, I just wanted to make sure that everybody's mic, I wanted to do a mic test, basically. Can everybody of the panelists make sure your mics are working properly so that we can hear you as best as possible? Thank you very much. So turning then to Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Mayaki, we have heard you, Excellency Mayaki, say, and I think rightly so, that poverty cannot be confined. Poverty cannot be in lockdown. And I would like for you to share with us from where you are sitting, being from the African Union Development Agency, what your experience has been so far during this pandemic, and how do you see us going forward, even if poverty cannot be locked down, and indeed, we try to lock it down. Over to you, Mayaki.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amadou. And I want to thank Vera Songwe for inviting me, and really appreciate the presentations that were made by the ministers of Spain and of Rwanda. I highly appreciated, by looking at it very carefully, how Rwanda is moving towards exiting with a progressive, intelligent management of the processes. So my first point would be, and I will come back to the issue of confining poverty. My first point would be that, I would like to go back to the Greek mythology and talk about Scylla and Charybdis. So we are really between Scylla and Charybdis. So the key question is how to choose the lesser of two evils, because strict lockdowns have their consequences, and we'll be able to talk about it, evidently. And at the same time, the issue.
Yes, this is over.
Hello?
We lost Professor Mayaki?
Yes.
Okay, go on, Professor. We hear you.
Yes,
Okay, okay. We are navigating. We are navigating as Odysseus between Silas and Charybdis. And a few facts. We know where we stand in the continent today. 54 countries, 55,000 cases, 54 countries which are affected, 50,000 cases, 16,000 recoveries, and roughly a little bit more than 42 countries have gone into lockdowns. The main objective of the lockdowns was to flatten the curve. And Africa was lucky enough to gain time and learn from the lessons of those who had preceded us. Rwanda was the first country to go into lockdown. And now we have Ghana, which is the first country to really open up. And Nigeria is also opening up. And the main reasons that are evoked in order to exit that lockdown are around two issues.
Professor, I think we lost you.
Okay. Do you hear?
Okay,
me?
you're back. You're back,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. How many? You lost me 1 minute? Or?
We lost you for just about 5 seconds, not even.
5 seconds. Okay. Okay. So when Nigeria and Ghana are opening up now, there are two main reasons which are put ahead. Take care of the vulnerable and the poor, and make sure that unemployment doesn't have very important consequences, as we see. Now, as they move towards opening up, there are two critical conditions that are being put in place. And it was rightly highlighted by the Minister of Rwanda. It's data and coordination. If you don't have the right data, in order to know what are the numbers and how do you trace and how you treat, then your exit strategy is affected in terms of efficiency. And secondly, the coordination. It's a whole government and whole societal process. So coordination becomes a key function. So on that basis, what we heard from the Minister of Spain was that there was no one best solution. Adaptation was the critical word. So in our case, our teams invented a concept. And the concept is that a strict lockdown for a long period of time is equal to MESS. So MESS is an acronym for M is mental health, and we'll talk about mental health. E is about economy. S is about society. And the second S is about sustainability. So we say a very strict lockdown is equal to MESS. And let me start by the M of MESS, which is mental health. We haven't talked enough about mental health. And you know, in the continent, if you look at the mental health workers compared to the population, it's 9 times less than the global average. But a World Economic Report came out in the last few days saying that we are experiencing the world's biggest psychological experiment. The data that we are getting from China says that about 30% of quarantined parents warranted mental health disorders. This is an issue.
I think we're having problems with Professor Mayaki connection.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yeah, let's try this again. But we heard all your concept around MESS and then the result of the World Economic Forum, I believe, study.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
So mental health. Second point is society, and I will just flag inequality and unemployment. Evidently, the more you stay under lockdown, the more you deepen inequality. And Vera Songwe referred to the issue of the small and medium enterprises and the informal sector, which are hardly hit. The third aspect beyond society, the fourth aspect, is sustainability. We know that sustainability in its original definition is about environment, the society factors and the societal factors are not really taken care of, then the table of sustainability cannot stand. So in conclusion, two main points. We need smart lockdowns which allow an intelligent exit strategy where the most vulnerable and the local communities are really preserved in terms of quality of life. And my second point is small and medium enterprises will be the main vector to revitalize our economies once we exit the lockdowns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mayaki. You know, we greatly appreciate it. And I'm so very glad that you brought up the concept of mental health, because indeed, you know, we know that in our continent, there's also a lot of stigma around mental health issues. And we are running the risk to go to a flare up to that. And smart lockdowns, but also as we're opening up, focusing on small enterprises and small industries. Thank you very much. We'll come back. We'll come back to you. I'd like now to turn to Professor Harun Borat from the University of Cape Town. And of course, Professor, welcome and good morning. We have seen, obviously, you know, South Africa was one of those hard lockdowns. And, you know, we would love to hear from you, your experience in it. But beyond that, what is different about how do we need to think about economic growth from where we are now going to post COVID-19?
Thank you very much, Madhu. I'm very honored to be here and also to be reconnected electronically with my good friend Vera. Before I continue, Amadou, let me ask participants to do themselves a favor and actually look at the ECA presentation that you distributed to us on COVID-19. It is probably one of the most succinct, really competent overview of how to think about lockdowns, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, but actually globally. I mean, and I must commend the ECA team. It's a really, really good, overview presentation. Advertorial for the ECA. It's a really excellent input. If I could just maybe confine myself to you, Amadou, just to sort of 3 or 4 key points. I mean, maybe just to your first question about South Africa. I mean, the experience is actually quite instructive because, as you correctly indicate, we imposed as a country a very, very early but also very strict lockdown, and probably one of the strictest we've seen globally. In terms of the data that we have, and in fact, if I, you know, I'm happy to share this information with colleagues and listeners. If you look at the trajectory of COVID-19, comparing ourselves to, I've got data for India, Brazil as middle-income countries, and then the UK and the US, we were exactly on the same trajectory up until we instituted the lockdown. Beyond which, what happens is a significant flattening for about 30 odd days or 10, 15 days in South Africa. So we immediately move off the exponential curve. The experience is instructive for 2 reasons. One is lockdowns will stave off, if you like, the exponential rise. But what was important is that the lockdowns, and then we can talk, of course, in terms of details around lockdowns, but the lockdowns are only useful for delaying the onset of the epidemic. And that's what the epidemiologists keep on reminding us. So what South Africa's managed to do is to shift itself onto a delayed, what they're calling a delayed exponential infection function. So we bought ourselves time. That's the key thing about an early lockdown, is that it bought South African public health authorities in particular time to actually establish systems, to get the testing sorted out, the screening, get community health field, and that then allowed us the ability to then think about dealing with the epidemic as it's likely to unfold, which is what's happening now. I want to though just turn to maybe and make I guess 2 or 3 key points. The first is about economic growth, which you alluded to, is our growth model. So if you look at all the macro projections that we've seen from the IMF, from the World Bank for Sub-Saharan Africa, all the CG models that are out there, even at the country level, I'm sure all of us are looking at our growth projection models. They've embedded in their equations, or they should have, 2 key new variables that we haven't had to before. And I've called them, and it's sort of, for want of a better way of describing it, is first is the ET function, which is the epidemic, right? And the second is a variable called LT, if you like, which is the lockdown. And both of those are suddenly really, really important. Apart from FDI and human capital in determining growth, it turns out that of course, the length, the scale, the nature of both the epidemic and lockdowns matter tremendously in terms of growth outcomes. So if you've modeled the epidemic correctly, and you've got the data which shows that you passed your peak point, for example, that's going to be really important in how you think about lockdowns, and the interaction between the epidemic and lockdowns will in turn impact on growth. I mean, a simple way to think about this is to what extent, and we should ask this question of all the macro projections you're getting through your ministries of finance and so on, is to what extent are we modeling the nature, extent, and length of lockdowns? So some of the World Bank data that's been produced on poverty estimates assume a lockdown, say, of 3 months. Well, if a country doesn't have a lockdown of 3 months, or they've got a phase to last for longer, that's going to have very material. Really, for me, our growth models must correctly identify, if you like, epidemics, or the epidemic in terms of where we are on the curve, as well as nature, extent, and length of lockdowns. If we don't do that, our growth models are thumbsucks. So with that in mind, the second point I wanted to make is that it turns out that the sort of marginalized, and I mean that facetiously, the marginalized part of economics called labor economics can actually be quite useful in thinking about lockdowns, right? And is so lockdowns matter in terms of work, and if you can model. So let me give you a simple example. If you were able to say that an entire economy could work from home, right? Then of course a lockdown would be immaterial in terms of economic activity. People work from home, production continues, trade continues, and so on, right? That's an extreme version. You need another variable to think about this, and we've modeled this where you think about work from home and what is called the physical interaction index. And there is data from the US Department of Labor that allows you to code sectors and occupations. I know it sounds very strange, by nature of physical face work, like a teacher, or do you need to physically interact with somebody? So when we are at our work, close to somebody. And thirdly, which we've added, so that you need to take public transport when you go to work, in which case physical proximity is really important. So essentially what you have is 2 variables, the ability to work from home and a physical interaction index. And the 2 together, you can measure at a sectoral level. And once you can measure those things, you actually have very clear guidelines at the sector level for lockdowns. So I'll give you 2 explicit examples at the extreme. In the financial and business services sector, the ability to work from home is very, very high. and the quantum of physical interaction is very low, meaning that that sector should be opened up in any lockdown. So in any sense of a lockdown phase that we have, that sector should be left alone. Education involves an inability to work from home, right? The teacher, the pupils need to be in the classroom on average, right? I know there's distance learning, but essentially very difficult to work from home. And secondly, must have physical interaction. Teachers and pupils are physically close to each other. That's a sector you leave alone for the last in terms of lockdown. And there's a distribution between those sectors of then design rules for lockdowns. I don't think economies are thinking clearly enough about a scientific approach to phasing down lockdowns. So I can talk a little bit longer for that, but I think that's really, really important. And then just finally, sorry, Chair, I think one important point which I'd like to put to the panel and the audience, because they're far better equipped than me, is that I would hazard that in addition to the COVID-19 economic growth channel, for sub-Saharan Africa and for Africa, we really need to be looking more closely at the indirect effect. I think the global action has brought with it channels outside of COVID, if you like. So controlling for COVID, right? You've got trade channels, FDI channels, foreign exchange channels, and my biggest worry is the commodity price channel, right? So if what's happened to commodity prices continue, that's the channel that dominates the story, right? It's an indirect effect from COVID. We don't have high infection levels at the moment on the continent, but those can stay as they are. But if commodity prices don't recover, that's the channel that's going to impact on poverty levels on the continent. And already you're beginning to see those numbers play themselves out. So the effect of commodity prices on growth and then on poverty reduction, for me, are the types of channels we need to be looking at in terms of this COVID economic discussion. Thank you, Chair. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Professor Harun Bourad. And I mean, for this very sophisticated indeed way of looking at it. And I really can feel that, you know, there is a way for you to share some of this with, you know, the African countries as we enter this phase. And I'm sure with the UNECA, there's a way to work together so that your this very elaborated, actually, thought process can be shared as widely as possible with stakeholders in the ministries of finance and economic development. I just would like to mention to answer actually two questions that have been coming a lot to us. First one is about the report from the ECA, and the second one is the report. You know, you spoke about Professor Bourad from your side, and we will see, to all who are connected out there, we will see how to make it widely available online using the UNECA media platform, but also using the All Africa platform. We will make sure those reports are available so everybody can benefit from them. I'd like now to turn to the experience from Morocco. Morocco was one of the countries, Kingdom of Morocco, in Africa, which went into lockdown really first. And there's a wealth of experience also there. And we have with us Mr. Mustafa Meluk, who is the CEO of Casablanca Media Partners, but also founder of the Africa 2025 think tank, for him to share with us the experience in Morocco, but also having his, you know, his hat as a media professional, how all these have been playing around from his eyes, and what lessons can be learned from Morocco. Mustafa, over to you.
Yes, good morning, Amadou. Hear me?
We do hear you.
Thank you, thank you. Hi, all of us from Casablanca, Morocco. And first of all, I'm delighted to participate to this important discussion. And thanks to Vera Swange from United Nations and for gathering all these panelists. And thank you for, first of all, for the speech of Her Excellency, Ms. Arancha Gonzalez. She highlighted the very important items regarding the issue of the pandemic and the cooperation between the several nations, and mainly between Spain and Africa. My country has been, of course, firmly mobilized in order to face the pandemic. And as an actor in the media sector, I would like to bring my insights on how Africans are experiencing the COVID-19. So first of all, this is an unprecedented event. And I think all the African states have opted for placing health safety, hopefully, of their citizens and sustainability of their respective economies at the center of their preoccupations. This is very important. First, the health of the population, and then to manage the consequences of the economic impact. So the debate was engaged also on how to get vaccines, possible therapies. We know that debate has been highlighted also in Europe about chloroquine, about professors, about laboratories working on that. But in our countries, we had to first of all, to have a fallback of technology, to consider the fallback of technology and science. And this is an experience for the future. In parallel, we found down the solidarity, mobilization, and creativity emerge with proven spectacular results. Production of masks started, valves, artificial respiratories. We never seen such mobilizations of startups, universities, and many actors saying that now we have to deal with this problem by ourselves. Nothing will happen from outside. Let's manage this outside. You want to have a mask? There is no mask outside. That means we have to produce them or we will not get one mask. So the main concerns were how to protect citizens, how to minimize the economic impact, how to reinforce the, let's say, the industrial sector, even just for masks, and how to guarantee resilience. So with the COVID-19, I think one of the most, let's say, experience we will get is that we have started in Africa, we have started writing our own story, maybe for the first time by ourselves. And I think that UN organisms should hear to the message of Africans starting now, because they feel that they have the keys for their issues, for their problems. About the Moroccan case, you know that the lockdown experience of Moroccans was very, let's say, exceptional, and it put our weaknesses out in the open and redefined our priorities, but also brought the best of Morocco and certainly the best of Africa. Our governance system has proven his efficiency and in managing the situation. You know that the King of Morocco took the decision before many European countries, before Spain, by the way. We were also to demonstrate anticipation, taking courageous, mobilizing, and salutary decisions. So that was very important, even if it was hard for the population. That was very important as decisions. And what was very interesting to consider is that while the decision has been taken, the complete lockdown and all the sanitary, security, social, economic necessary measures were rigorously implemented with discipline, with an impressive precision, and most importantly, the total adhesion or cooperation of all the citizens. So results, with 183 deaths till now, Morocco displays one of the best results in the context of managing the pandemic. So now, of course, the priority is how to get out from this lockdown. And the lockdown exit strategy has not been announced in Morocco. It will be presented next Monday to the Parliament, because the process of decision has to consider several steps. But the main pillars will be, let's first, the transparent sanitary information, which is very important, how to limit the virus circulation, how did hospital capacities get reinforced, how to get access to treatments, vaccines, or whatever, and priority to preserve health of Moroccan citizens. And these principles are also valid from several countries in Africa. Second, how to implement guidelines in order to learn how to live with the virus. We have to learn to live with the virus and to adopt barrier behaviors. We used to be very close to our friends, to kiss them, to salute them with a very harm relations. But still, I think that in the future, within the transportation, within the work or the companies, in the shops, at schools, we need to consider some barriers in order to protect ourselves. And of course, the second issue was how to start recovering the economy. That is the focal point of the next step, which is the lockdown exit. And there are several possibilities studied, which even is regarding the case we are treating. For example, for school, there is a lot of sensitivity, how to get school open step by step. Social activities, welcoming several hundreds of people, that will not be validated till maybe after the summer, but there are several possibilities that will be considered. And of course, Morocco had launched some aids in order to support companies having difficulties, but also households. More than 4 million households received aid from the government during this period, where we registered, of course, the close of hundreds and thousands of companies. So the priorities, as said, will be how to progressively open let's say the economy, but with the respect of the health of the people, and of course to get a clear stimulus development plan, because the economic impact of the COVID-19 will be hard. It's a first experience for the world in time of impact, and I think that and I'm sure that we're going to be back to discuss this issue. As a media man, we had to cover with all the medias in Morocco, and I'm sure that the role of media, the role of information and communication in this important exit will be crucial. Media will have to play an important role, and I hope that we'll be back to this subject at the end of the discussion. Thank you, Ahmad.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, for highlighting all those aspects and what's going on in Morocco. We'll come back, promised, to you on the role of the media in this endeavor, in this journey, the next journey we're going to. But I would like now to turn to Kennedy Odede, who's the CEO and co-founder of Shining Hope for Communities. And we have heard at the beginning from Vera Songwe how eloquently he has spoken against the principle of lockdown. And we have seen all the, I was going to say, hey, we happened in Nairobi and in Kibera in particular, with many demonstrations, extra, very hard lockdown. So what has been your experience, Mr. Odede, and what can you tell us about how you view this phase we are in and the new journey we're going to be entering on, which the exit strategy? Over to you, Mr. Odede.
Thank you, Amadou, for that. Thank you so much. Shofco works in the informal settlement. Kibera is where we started. Right now, we are working in over 14 slums in Kenya. And to be honest with you, they say this COVID has been equalizer. But I really disagree, because as Africans, we have to open our eyes, because this pandemic has really reminded us about the naked truth of what we call Africa rising. COVID, Africa rising, and now rising with who? So, and the reason, and what we have seen is that many population, almost 60% of our population in Africa, they are really struggling, mostly. And I know Dr. Shongwe talk about 65 billion that we are really kind of losing in our continent per month. But I would like to go deeper and find out, in this 65 billion, how much is from informal economy? Because most of the time we forgot informal economy. And this is the place that I come from, like Kibera. So I think that we could be able to do full lockdown in a reality because of the inequality that we have in our countries. So I met somebody, I told my friend, Dr. Songwe, is that they told me in Kibera, how can I be locked and buy a mask of $1 when I cannot feed myself? And they say this very clearly, I better die from corona than starvation. I was touched, but that's a very powerful thing. That's from the ground. To be honest with you, many people on the ground are more like, they care about their stomach. They care about the basic need. And I'm so happy today I'm speaking to leaders, African leaders here. We have to do something. People are struggling. And I'm seeing another challenge, Dr. Songwe, what's going to happen in terms of when we move from COVID. Do you know that we don't have enough fertilizers? Do you know that locust is really affecting our land? Do we know that there will be no food? So my advice for African government is this. Can we, as we fight in the informal settlement, as we fight for this COVID, what are we doing for agriculture? When we get out, where will we get food? And the biggest challenge that I can tell you for free, when there is inequality and people are surviving through hand to mouth, they are ready for demonstration, for uprising, because they're not losing anything. So that's what I'm seeing in our community. And I think this is going to also help us to understand after this, what are we going to do as governments moving forward? We don't want to see places like Kibera. We don't want to see places that are really no planning, because our eyes are open. Everyone is so scared in a place that is really congested. South Africa that we love, you know this very well. We have a professor here. It almost exploded. Why? It was food. I mean, so as we work on this, in my community where I go, where I work in the informal settlement, I feel it's high time for policymakers also to make policies that are really reflecting on the ground. Good example, social distancing. I wish our African leaders could have twisted it. Social distancing, I'm sorry, was really coined for the Western world, who live in 2-bedroom house, who have a fridge. They can be in their house a couple of weeks before going out. Will you tell that to a person living in a slum? You know what I mean? So I think what we have been facing and now is coming out is that we are not listening to the ground. We're in our offices. And it's high time that we start listening to what's happening on the ground, to the reality on the ground. So I've been advocating for, it's okay to restrict movement, but can we also boost the economy? I know I'm really advocating for debt forgiveness for Africa, but I'll also be very sad if that money goes to few individual pockets. I'll be so sad. But if African leaders can come with a strategy on how people who are living below $2, as Dr. Songwe talked about, 40% of them now are even suffering most. You know what I mean? Cash transfer will be really good to these kind of communities. Otherwise, Africa is going to be faced, and I'm saying it again and again, if we don't work together. The Africa Rising narrative is not reaching on the ground, and things might explode. Thank you so much, Amadou.
My dear friend, Kennedy Odede, thank you for eloquently really putting your finger on some very, very, very critical issues, and which are human issues, which are actually touching, not only in Kibera, not only in Kenya, but many communities around the continent. You raised one absolutely critical question, the weight of the informal economy, our African economies. I mean, in many countries, we know this is over 60%. So, I mean, it is important that you are championing this cause, and we are so glad that you have been able to share your voice so that it can be heard, because in this journey was rebuilding our continent. We need to rebuild it better, and definitely the voices of the less fortunate, the voices of civil society in general need to be heard, and it need to be part of this journey. So we are going to get into some additional questions now. But before we do that, I just wanted to see if the Executive Secretary has some comments at this point, because a lot have been said. And a lot of these thoughts and ideas which have been put out there come directly onto your desk, or from the perspective where you are sitting from, you're seeing this. So before we get to the closing remarks which you would be making, I just would like to get a sense of, from you, of what you have heard so far.
No, thank you, Amadou. I think thank you for all the excellent remarks. It's difficult to pull them together, but let me try to say 4 things that I have heard. I think one of them, which Professor Mayaki raised, which we don't normally talk about, and maybe even at the ECA we should, in our social division, look at it, is a little bit the social impact of the lockdowns, the psychological impact, but there is also just the fear of getting the COVID-19, and maybe there is some social element that we need to work on and see how we communicate it and how we manage that process, and I think that's particularly important. I think, thank you very much, of course, Harun, for recognizing the team that did the report. It's a big team at the ECA that did the work, and I think we just are hoping that we can contribute to how we have this debate and put, the sort of, what are the binding constraints, what are the tensions that our policymakers are struggling with, and that's why we have journalists on this call, Amadou, you and Mustafa, so that the debate is not sort of overwhelmed by, it's wrong and it's right, but to just get a sense of some of the realities on the ground that, people like Minister Uziel are struggling with. I think that we've heard from Rwanda a little bit about, how we start going out of this exit and shelter in place. And Harun has given us some guidance about how to do it. Where should we go? What do you do? I think the financial sector first, maybe the schools a little bit later, and hopefully in the ECA report we can do something that gives a sense of what is that sort of trending. There is a big question about, did Africa lock down early, and are we going to have to do this again when maybe we start getting to the peak? And I think part of this conversation really is about how we prepare ourselves in the event that we may have to do it again, and so this is almost a dry run, and so Africa will be lucky because we did a dry run. I think, Kennedy, we could just listen to you for another hour. Why, how can you buy a mask for $1 when you cannot buy food? Is the question I take away, and everything that you said just resonates so much with all of us. But what I would have, the question of governance is so super critical. Governments have gotten resources already as part of the call for debt relief that ECA and finance ministers started making. We need to see those resources go to places like Kibera. We need to see them go to the slums. The ECA report shows, how many slums we have on the continent and how those people are going hungry, and to make sure that those are the first people we target. But then for some of that, we need the internet to work, and we need to be able to get to them in time. And I think that the work that you're doing to first help us to identify and target is quite important. But I was thinking, as I was listening to you, maybe we should just bring him back for 30 minutes to talk to finance ministers and get that sense of, yes, you're against lockdowns, but I don't think that at the end of the day, it's really that you're against lockdowns, is that you're actually fighting for, I think, the most vulnerable in our societies, and how we can make sure that we protect them while ensuring that they get the basic services of food and healthcare. And I think that is just an amazing call and cry for help. I think governance becomes a particularly important part of this conversation. And as we exit, I think one of the things that we have to start thinking about is how can we bring civil society and the media to begin to monitor those resources, at the higher level, as Minister Arancha said, as we said, as Professor Mayaki said, all of us are talking about the resources that we need to fight the crisis. But we also need to make sure then that when we get those resources, they get to the right places and the people who need them the most get them. And the question is, how can we do that? So I think this governance issue begins to override really a lot of our conversation. And maybe, I think it was Mustafa who talked about Africa coming together to work, to fight the crisis. I think we need to come together much more strongly to work to ensure that governance works as we get out of this crisis, so that we can ensure that the most vulnerable do not fall further behind because of this. Those are the points I took out of it. But Kennedy, you're coming back for sure. You and Mayaki will now come back, but on different sides.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Secretary, for sharing those thoughts. And indeed, governance always critically important, particularly in times of crisis. I'd want to go now to His Excellency, the Minister of Finance from Rwanda. And please, Professor Mayaki, you also take part of this question, because obviously now we are thinking about reopening where we can. But we know that somehow reopening will be dealing with very serious economic challenges within our own countries. So at a time when governments would also need more resources. So to both of you, His Excellency, Minister, and Dr. Mayaki, how would we do to mobilize domestic resources in times of crisis currently? Where would we go and find those pockets of wealth, whether it's in the private sector, whether it's at the level of individuals, when we know what the fiscal pressure is already in our countries, what would be the mechanism to mobilize resources? Over to you. First, His Excellency, the Minister from Rwanda, and then Dr. Mayaki, please.
Thank you, Amadou. Following the contribution from the panelists, I think countries need to assess properly their preparedness to exit the lockdown. Now, as we adopt our recovery plans, as we have already completed our exercise, it is very important just to address the issues raised by Kennedy, to include a strong component of social protection in the recovery plan. Second, agriculture. We need to support agriculture to ensure food security. In our case, we had to provide free food to people from informal sector in the city of Kigali, and it worked. But there was a shortage of food in the rest of the country. That would have been a very serious problem. We need to support agriculture to increase productivity and to ensure food security. Our recovery plan includes a special fund, a recovery fund to support affected businesses, large, medium, small, and micro businesses. And there is a special provision for hospitality industry, hotels and tour operators, and who were heavily affected by the closure of tourism, and whose recovery will take longer than other sectors. And also there is special emphasis to micro and small enterprises with cheap loans and also guarantees. So in regard to resource mobilization, of course, we are all affected by one of the effects of COVID-19 is the decline in the tax revenue because of economic activities that have been closed for more than a month, and also the recovery is slow. So what we are doing is whatever we can collect, we need to refocus, we need to prioritize our spending, focusing on social protection, focusing on high-intensive labor infrastructure to create jobs and to create revenues and boost domestic demand. What we are providing for businesses, we provide cheap working capital to resume work and to work gradually back to normal level of activity. So we also need to use where the facilities we are getting from World Bank, from IMF, and also from the all debt relief that have been announced. But we need also to suspend or need to reduce necessary spending in the government and focus on aspects that really help recovery, but also support the most vulnerable in our community. Thank you.
Professor Maeki, any thought about resource mobilizations internally?
Yeah, thank you, Amadou. Just going back to what Kennedy was saying, when people run out of cash and out of food, you cannot lock them down. If you lock them down, you need to provide them with cash or food. So it's a very simple equation. You cannot lock people down when we don't have cash, we don't have food. So if you impose lockdown, then you need to find a way to give them cash or to give them food. And that's where we go to the governance issue. For me, there are three takes. Countries which have sound governance systems, which have already learned how to manage these sound governance systems, will exit properly and will find the right ways to have the necessary budgetary allocations. Because resources will be reduced. If they are reduced, you will need to reallocate according to new priorities. And for that, you need sound governance systems. So I'm not really worried about countries like Rwanda, like Ghana, and some others. But in countries where you have extreme inequalities, this extreme inequality will have a repercussion on how the governance systems really adapt. And my take is that in terms of political consequences, we are yet to see what will happen. But it will be important, really, to look at this governance issue. My third point is the way we design public policies will be impacted by the consequences of this crisis. As you notice, in terms of epidemiological statistics, we have not been as much as hit by the others. Well, there is still an uncertainty, but globally, the main question that we'll have to solve will be about social and economic questions. In food security, we know that with the disruption of the global value chains, we know that because of the fact that we are net food importers, there will be a critical situation in terms of availability of agricultural products and access to food, and we see already prices of food going up. So this issue of food security will have to be tackled. If you look at, I like to refer to the Sahel region, which has the insecurity with the jihadists, with Boko Haram, and that insecurity has provoked a food insecurity, which threatens about 15 to 17 million people. So on top of that, you have the COVID crisis. So institutions will be shaken on how they manage concomitant crises. A crisis of security, a crisis of food security, a crisis related to COVID. And evidently, in these cases, regional solutions will be absolutely fundamental. And I think African leaders are fully aware of the necessity to look at regional solutions. Now, nationally, communities will have to be brought on board. When Kennedy was referring to a community, the issue there is trust. I think we will come out of this with questions about trust. How citizens trust their institutions to face this crisis and manage them. That will be the critical question for the leadership.
Thank you very much, Professor Mayeki. I would like to, refer back to one aspect, critical aspect, Kennedy already mentioned earlier, which is this locust problem in Kenya, he mentioned, but really in East Africa and moving a little bit towards West. And that's another aspect which would be, it's another plague added to the one we are facing now, which is the medical one. So to both Mustafa and then Professor Harun, Mustafa, the media role. We've spoken about this. Thanks to the leadership of Vera Songwe at UNECA, we have created a platform. But very rapidly, share with us your vision of the media role. And then I will want to go back to Professor Harun about this question, which to me touches on many things that have been done, which is, Professor, who is part of this new journey? Can we make sure, how governments can make sure that all sectors of our societies are involved in rebuilding our societies and our economies? And if you look at the private sector, of course, all the private sectors should be in there, but also civil society, academia, everybody else. So we start with you, Mustafa, then we go to Professor Harun, then we'll come back for one question before turning it over to Vera Songwe for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Amadou. Really, the role of media, even if this role has been very important for the lockdown, this role will be more important for the exit, because people will stay waiting for information, for guidance, for things that will we will give them confidence on what will happen. And I salute my thanks to Vera, because she involved us in several discussions within the African media panel to help her, let's say, having the reality of the field in Africa. So, but let's talk about medias. Even financially weakened, because it's not the moment of investing on on financing medias. Even if weakened, media actors have gone above and beyond in order to maintain a front row for the lockdown phase. Sanitary information, alerting regarding protective measures, governmental press releases, and multiple other subjects were treated. So the media will engage also intensively this dynamic when the time comes to lift the lockdown and launch an economic revival. And the tone of voice will have to go to stimulate optimism and ambition within entrepreneurs, within employees, within civil society, within all the actors, and to create confidence between authorities and population. So the objective is to spread trust amongst populations and to share vision of hope. We need this vision to be highlighted, to be disseminated, to be shared with all the people for a better future. And while guaranteeing the transmission of trustworthy information, and most importantly, rejecting anarchy and any attack to freedom of speech. It's not because we are in a situation of crisis that means we have to lose all the let's say, the benefits of liberty of freedom. So African decision makers will have to build with us, with medias, a new vision for the media and the communication sector. Mainly now, because media's activities are a strategic industry, playing an essential economic role a democratic safety net, and a frontline social cultural mission. So I would like to seize this opportunity, sorry to be opportunist, Amadou, but to seize this opportunity to make a proposal. I know that within the United Nations, we have many organisms, institutions taking care of several issues or several domains. For example, UNICEF is in charge of children, the OMS or the WHO is taking care of health, the UNESCO is taking care of education, science, culture, and at the end, in a less pronounced way, the communication. I think it's time to get the communication on medias or the content development and production to move even at the first plate of UNESCO, or to have her own institution, maybe to place the media and communication industry held today, including audiovisual, digital, including the booming of social medias, the creation of global entities dedicated. We need to create a global entity to be developed and to help the development of information, communication, and media. And media shall not be considered anymore as achievements partners for other industries. They represent a sector in which the contribution in creation of business opportunities and employment is more than evident. Maybe an African mechanism aiming to support the media's emergence nationwide and continental-wide is really essential today. So maybe the UNICA, thank you, Vera, if you can take the lead in that purpose, could carry this initiative in the United Nations, and of course the door is open to any other multi or bilateral initiative. But at the end, believe me, without a real involvement and organized involvement of medias, the lockdown exit will not be a success. The medias will have to be involved, prepared, and to be a partner, not only having at the end of the time to communicate. They have to be involved in order to be an actor and not only a spectator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. We heard you loud and clear, and as you were speaking, we're having a lot of reactions coming from our audience talking about, if we can also organize something about the role of media in combating fake news and in all. So we'll work on it together. But we're almost at the end of it, at the end of our panel. Professor Haroon, the guiding principles in rebuilding. I'm thinking about, inclusiveness. Can you share some words of wisdom with us, please?
So, for me, Amadou, I think if we think of, and the previous speakers have captured much of this notion, but I think in terms of a sort of immediate response to COVID-19, probably three ways in which to think about this. The first is this sort of immediate short-term response that essentially revolves around food security. I think my friend from Kenya picked this up, that in South Africa in particular, and in other African countries, food insecurity has just become a huge issue. I think the important point about recognizing and effective and optimal delivery mechanisms. So it's one thing to recognize that you need to provide food security to a particular region or area, but it's quite another to design optimal strategies to deal with it. And I think there's been an underuse, at least in the South African context, an underuse of technology, food vouchers, using cell phones to link food vouchers to retailers that do operate already in poorer areas where food insecurity is a problem, rather than the old system of actually taking trucks of food out to people. So for me, that's the first line of defense. Secondly, if you broaden that to thinking about vulnerable households, this is a really important nuanced statement, and often we tend to forget this, is that the point of a COVID-19 response and also a medium-term inclusive growth strategy related to COVID is not to support vulnerable households. It's to support vulnerable households who've been made worse off by the epidemic. And there's a very distinct difference between the two. So if you target everybody below the poverty line, right, you haven't really designed a target strategy to those who've been more affected by COVID-19. So if I give you an example, if somebody used to have a social grant from the state before the crisis, and that was their only form of income, right? The COVID-19, if there's nobody affected by the pandemic, their vulnerability has not changed, right? If somebody had no social grant from the state, but they were operating an informal business, right, in a South African township or in a Namibian township, and suddenly they were forced to close because of a lockdown, if they're still vulnerable, if they're still below the poverty line, their vulnerability has declined by more. And it's that targeting that in the first instance, of course, if you have infinite resources, then it's easy, but it's that kind of targeting we really need to think carefully about. And I don't think we've designed effective ways to do that. Then the third point is we should not forget that in the context of a growth contraction, right, in the context of a severe economic blowout, firms matter. And small firms and large firms matter. So the extent to which large dominant firms, right, may not necessarily say suffer from cash flow problems or wage bill issues as much as a micro enterprise, but they would require support, perhaps through banks and so on, maybe a credit guarantee scheme, through government backing loans from banks to these larger firms. I think that should not be underestimated because of the scale of the economic destruction. And so for me, figuring out how you get that cascading from hunger security to targeting vulnerable households, and then to making sure that the continuum of firms is also dealt with on the supply side of the economy is really crucial to thinking about the path forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor. So before I turn it over to Vera Songwe, I just want to make sure all the panelists have their videos on, so that we can take a good picture for the record of this meeting. So please, all panelists, turn on your video feed, so the technicians can get a great picture of all of us. I can't see everybody, but hopefully everybody has done that. But just before I give it over to Vera Songwe, I'm going to ask you a question, which of course I can imagine what would be Kennedy Odedey's answer to this. But if you were the head of state, each one of you, would you consider going into a lockdown? And then, accessorily, for our friends in Spain, would you eventually consider going back to lockdown? And I don't hope that for you. So you can take the question, each one by one after the other. And then after that, I'll turn it over to Madam Vera Songwe for her closing remarks. Mustafa, if you were head of state, would you close down?
Yes, definitely.
All right, that's loud and clear. Odedey Kennedy, would you close down if you were head of state?
Not.
All right, I can hear you also loud and clear. And His Excellency from Rwanda, would you have closed down?
Yes, of course.
The answer?
Yes, of course. This is requires that we close and protect our citizens.
Thank you. And Professor Mayeki, I've heard you before on this question. Would you close down?
Yep, absolutely. You need to stop the virus. Because when you say close down, you need to stop the virus. And in stopping the virus, you have the instrument of locking down. But an absolute strict lockdown for a prolonged time is really not the solution.
I agree with Mayaki.
Thank you, Professor. And then Professor Harun, what would be your take?
Mine would be, it's not about lockdown, yes or no. It's definitely yes to a lockdown. It's more about making sure that you have appropriate evidence to manage the process of the lockdown, rather than it being one instrument, sort of everybody off work or nobody in lockdown. And I think it's managing the process of the lockdown that's really the crucial thing.
Thank you. And our friends from Spain, sorry to put you on the spot on this one. If you were to go back to lockdown, what do you think? Would you do it?
We have to do it. We really did have no choice, and we still have no choice. I don't want to, I mean, after hearing all of you and the very deep insights that you've shown, I would have very little to add to it, except what Dr. Tedros himself said: test, test, test is the fastest and easiest way out of the lockout. And I want to thank you, Amadou, for conducting this conversation, and Vera for inviting us to it on behalf of the Minister. Thank you very much to all of you. And hello to Dr. Mayaki, an old friend that I hope I see in Spain at some point in the future. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much for your participation. We appreciate you as a country, and we appreciate totally the leadership we've seen from Spain. Muchas gracias, señor. So now we're turning over to Vera Songwe for her closing remarks, and then she'll give it back to me to just wish everybody something. Over to you, Vera Songwe.
Thank you. This has been such a rich debate, and I'm glad that we were able to organize it. I've learned a lot, and I hope as has everybody. I think three things that are coming out is, the first is test, test, test. And really, this is the big issue. Our leaders are all now, I think, working really hard to get test kits out to ensure that we can test and test more and test better and test faster. And that is part of where we're hoping that when we get the debt service standstill, and I'm going back to that, we need those resources that we can start testing. But I think, as you have seen with this sort of rapid fire question at the end, Kennedy, I love you because you stayed with you stuck to your point. And then you sort of agreed with Dr. Mayaki, so you went in the middle a little bit. And so I guess you're saying lockdown, but you must give us food first, and you must have good governance. Yes. But I think, wonderful. But that gives you a sense maybe of, the debate that we've been having on the broader spectrum. And really, this was the purpose of this conversation, was to say that it's not about lockdowns, it's about protecting lives. And I don't think that there is anybody out there who says, let them die. I think we all want them to live. We all want to live. And particularly, this is going to hit our small and medium enterprises the most. We know that, because, that is the sort of the strongest part of our fabric, but also the weakest part of our fabric in some sense. And we worry about that. But the reason we also have the media here is to take this message that it's not about lockdowns, it's about protecting lives. Lockdowns are costing us an incredible amount of money, $65 billion a month for the continent for lockdowns. We cannot afford it, but we cannot afford to lose lives either. So what we need to do is come back quickly into an exit strategy that allows us to sort of grow back again, and grow back in a way that is sustainable. And there we need, again, resources for our SMEs. But as we talk about SMEs, I want to talk about the informal sector. For a long time on the continent, we have almost romanticized the informal sector. Yeah. I think, as Harun said, that is the sector that is the most hit. If you assume that you have a taxi driver who is unaccounted for in any public records, and his wife that sells in the market, those two people before the COVID crisis were probably in the middle income class. They were making enough money to send their kids to school and have food on their tables. But now, because tourism is closed, the taxi driver or the tourist guide no longer has a job. And the wife in the market no longer has a job. And we have them on no database on the continent. So those people are even more worse off, as Harun said, than the ones that we already know. So even, Kennedy, your Kibera people are almost safer than these people we're talking about in the informal sector. And I think we need to use this as maybe the moment when the informal sector is no longer normal. The informal sector we must normalize. The informal sector we must find. We must stop calling them the informal sector. They're normal people who need to be formalized and who need to get the basic services that our countries need to provide. And I think if there is one message there, that should be it. And through the telecommunications and the work that we're doing with IT, I think those of you government officials on the panel, we should work together to see how we make sure that we can do that. Minister Uzil, the minister from Spain, we will need your support to see how we can maybe work with our IT systems to could now formalize the informal sector. You don't need to pay taxes, but I think what this shows is that you become even more vulnerable when there is a crisis because the state cannot find you and the state cannot support you. And then finally, I think on the food crisis, we're doing some work on that. We will maybe have another conversation and another debate around what to do with prices, food crisis. I think Morocco has passed some good laws in terms of controlling prices. We don't want over control of prices. We don't want state command back again. But I think there is a case there for how we work on it. The CFTA, we need to make sure that food can move across borders because some of the issues around the food crisis is that food cannot move across borders. We should not leave out, I think, some of the big signature items on the continent like the CFTA. We need to continue making sure that even during this crisis, but more importantly, post the crisis, we can pick those back up and move forward with them. But once again, I think there's been so much rich conversation. Some of this material that we have gotten from here, we haven't answered you yet, but we will take that back. We will do some more work and maybe have another conversation in a space like this that tells us that we are not arguing about lockdowns. We're not arguing about whether we should do them or not. We almost all agree. But what we want to do is make sure that we can protect our people, but also go back to recovery very quickly because we keep growing again as we have been doing in the past. I see the Minister of Spain raising his hand, so I don't know if he wanted to say something. I'll give him that, but we have maybe 2 minutes before we close. Minister of Spain, did you want to say something?
I'm not minister yet, fortunately for everybody. But thank you very much, Vera. I just wanted to add one thing that I neglected to say, and I really wanted to say, which is that Africa needs to get the story out of how well it is performing. Because in a world that is unfortunately used to see Africa as an underperformer, you're doing much, much better than many other regions of the world, including, of course, Europe. And I don't think this is just due to coincidence or some, I don't know, the heat or some external factors. You are doing well, Africa is doing well, and this story should get out. We should, I mean, it has to come from you, not from us, but not from Spain. That is something that is worth telling in a world that is very, right now, short of success stories. Thank you.
Well, on that good note, and also on the note of hope that eventually Professor Mayaki can travel to Spain, which means that our airports will open up and tourism will start again. I say thank you very much to everybody, and we leave hopeful that we can fight the crisis and get back to growth. Over to you, Amadou.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Secretary. Thank you very much for all the points you have raised in there. And thank you very much for the message from our friend in Spain really touches on what Mustafa was saying. We have a narrative here which we need to push out, and we are going to do it. And to all our audience, thank you very much, all of you panelists. Thank you. This has been really enriching. You can't imagine the number of messages we're receiving, really appreciating that we're having this discussion. We have had close to 1,000 people registered for this. Systematically, I mean, throughout it, we had between 670, 700 people who have been tuned in. And we're going to take all the good suggestions we've received. So this was the first. Stay tuned. We'll come back to you. And thank you for sharing your morning with us. We appreciate it. And thank you very much. And most importantly, please, please stay safe, you, your loved one, and everybody, and be kind to each other. Thank you, and see you very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramadan Karim.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Vera. Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.